Good afternoon, everyone. That's what we're looking for. I'm Mike Sell of Indiana University of Pennsylvania. It's really an honor and a real pleasure to moderate this panel on staging monsters. I'd first like to introduce Iván-Daniel Espinosa, University of Colorado, who will be presenting Dance of Utter Darkness, Monsters, Ghosts, and Voices of the Earth in Japanese Buto. Iván-Daniel Espinosa is a performance studies scholar and dance choreographer that writes about and creates work engaged with ecology, climate change, mushrooms, interspecies performance, and Japanese Buto dance. For over a decade, Espinosa has presented his ecology-themed Buto performances nationwide, and since 2021 has served as the executive producer of the annual Salish Sea Buto Festival. Espinosa is currently a PhD student in theater and performance studies at the University of Colorado, and also holds a Master of Arts from New York University's Tisch School of the Arts. Let's welcome Iván-Daniel.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and thank you, Michael and Renee and Jen and the whole team for organizing an amazing conference. Thank you all so much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to start developing these ideas. This is the first time I've ever presented this paper. So, the emergence of Buto in late 1950s and 1960s Tokyo was a major innovation in 20th century dance theater and performance, not only in Japan, but around the world. According to the Routledge Companion to Buto Performance, there are now Buto companies and practitioners all around the world and many major metropolitan areas, and many far smaller locales feature an annual Buto festival. I produce one every year. More and more people are doing Buto training, and Buto is seen as relevant to a wide variety of art forms beyond dance, such as theater, performance art, music, fashion, and the visual arts. Originated by Tatsumi Hijikata through experimental collaborations with his collaborators Kazuo Ono, Yoko Ashikawa, and others, Buto was developed at the height of the Japanese counterculture movement after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, incorporating both Western and non-Western influences such as Japanese surrealism, Japanese no drama, Zen aesthetics, as well as French existentialism, German expressionism, Antonin Artaud's theater of cruelty, and the avant-garde literature of French writers like Genet, de Sade, and Japanese writer Yukio Mishima. The dance form of Buto, originally called Ankoku Buto, meaning dance of darkness, named by founder Tatsumi Hijikata, is centered around, quote, new modes of bodily expression that wrestle with and rebel against a rapidly changing society, unquote. And I argue wrestle with and rebel against the forces of militarism, capitalism, anthropocentrism, and the dominance of technology in a rapidly changing society. Featuring performers covered head to toe in white body paint, monstrous bodily contortions, and facial expressions of anguish and rapture, Buto continues to shock people worldwide. From its inception, the themes of monstrosity, horror, death, and the grotesque have been recurring, if not instrumental, in Buto. The concepts of abjection and monstrous corporeality, particularly with respect to identity and somatic ontology, permeate Buto narratives. Costumes made with rotting, decaying foliage and plant detritus are staple elements. Choreographies portraying death, decay, and decomposition dominate Buto performance. Buto performances frequently incorporate grotesque imagery and disturbing physical movements, such as contorted limbs, eyes rolled to the back of the head, fangs and reptilian tongues, and monstrous facial expressions. In an attempt to contest normative ideas of beauty and identity, while also challenging audiences to meditate on death and mortality. According to Buto scholar Tanya Calamoneri, the point of monstrous imagery and monstrous transformation in Buto is, quote, not merely strangeness. The point is to blur the expression of normal humanness, to question conditioned responses, and ultimately to propose new ways of inhabiting the body and of inhabiting the world, unquote. Rosemary Candelario, a performance studies scholar that specializes in Buto, explains that ever since 1968, there has been a strong connection between Buto and the ecology of the far north of Japan. As Buto has spread around the world, this specific connection to Tohoku has expanded to include an attention to local landscapes and to broader concepts of nature. Many of the nature-themed and ecology-themed performances in Buto have been developed and gestated by women and female Buto dancers like Yoko Ashikawa, Natsu Nakajima, and Saga Kobayashi in Japan, and in the United States by Eiko Otake of Eiko and Koma, Maureen Fleming, and Seattle Buto pioneer Joan Lage, one of my teachers. Nevertheless, despite the fact that Buto has been disseminated far beyond the borders of Japan, growing in popularity as it evolves and graces the stages of major theaters and dance festivals around the world, there is a lack of published academic research focused on examining both the monstrosity of Buto, the monstrous elements, and the ecology of Buto, the ecological elements. In this paper, I attempt to draw connections between Buto's monstrosity and ecology. I argue that monstrous imagery and monstrous choreographies in Buto engender embodied practices that challenge anthropocentrism and gesture towards intimacy with the earth and with nature. In a 2023 article titled Buto Ecologies, Dance Practice as Training for a New Relationship with the Environment, Rosemary Candelario writes that there is something specific, something ecological about Buto practices that leads toward a radical reordered corporeality, a bodily sensitivity to connections constituted by the ecology itself, and an embodied and practiced ecological consciousness fundamentally attuned to interdependence and interconnection. As a performance studies scholar with over 10 plus years of Buto training and performance experience, I hope to build on Candelario's scholarship and contribute to the emerging conversation in theater, dance, and performance studies, exploring the links between ecology, monstrosity, and Buto. And in this paper, I hope to plant the seeds for examining how the monstrous concepts of decay, death, rot, and decomposition are practiced and performed in Buto as a kind of ecological praxis that reminds both performer and audience that they are not separate from the earth and the more than human world. For the past 50 years, choreographies centering on decay and decomposition have dominated Buto. Seminal Buto performances like founder Hijikata's Hosotan and Summer Storm, as well as Kazuo Ono's The Dead Sea, consider how the decay of the human subject and the decomposition of the human body are a natural part of earthly cycles. Some of Hijikata's most infamous quotes include, "Buto is a rotting corpse, standing straight up in a desperate bid for life. And I would like to make the dead gestures inside my body die one more time and make the dead themselves die again. I would like to have a person who has already died die over and over inside my own body. I may not know death, but death knows me. These statements on the nature of Buto by founder Hijikata reflect a desire to probe the corporeality of decomposition and excavate its viscerality, using performance to conjure up an existential meditation on the monstrosity of mortality in societies that often suppress those feelings. I argue that decomposition and decay in Buto act as an ecological praxis, reminding us that we are not isolated from the earth or from the mortal beings that are implicated with us in this earthly existence. Indian-American theater artist Annalisa Diaz writes of the ways that Euro-Western performance conditions us to view decay and death as a final ending, and she encourages us to ponder, what if instead of dramaturgies of collapse, we looked to the earth and learned from natural processes of decomposition? A dramaturgy of decomposition is a tender invitation beyond loss. In Buto, decomposition and decay are not treated as a finite linear ending, but rather as an ever-unfolding, vibrant process of transformation that connects us to the earth, a corporeal metamorphosis that connects us to multi-species ecologies. For example, the multi-species ecosystems of fungi and underground mycelium networks transform decaying bodies into new life. Many types of fungi are saprotrophic, decay eaters. They generate their energy by breaking down and absorbing dead organisms and materials, detritus from plants and animals. Through the fungal saprotroph, the materials of past life are broken down and recomposed. Decay is recycled into nutrients to support other life forms. Everything dead and alive goes into the soil and gets transformed into life, the life of our planet. Buto, like fungi, remind us that life and death are in coexistence and mutual exchange, and that decomposition is absolutely essential to maintaining ongoing life. In addition to the conceptual and thematic exploration of decomposition and decay in Buto, many Buto artists incorporate these themes into their live performances by expressing decomposition visually through the stage design and by utilizing costumes made of rotting plant detritus and performing it physically as well through the dance choreography. One vivid example of this is Japanese artist Yuko Kaseki's performance titled 9 Steps to Dust that was first debuted in 2019 in New York City. I was there at the conference called Buto Next to celebrate the Rutledge Companion. Let's see if I can give you an image of Yuko Kaseki. There we go. Kaseki's 9 Steps to Dust performance is based on the ancient Japanese art of kazosu that graphically depicts the 9 stages of decaying human corpse, inviting audiences to embrace the more vulnerable aspects of life and death, the decaying, the fermentative, the composting. Kaseki's choreography is structured into 9 distinct parts, corresponding to the 9 stages of kazosu that portray the anatomical process of human decomposition. Historically, kazosu consists of graphic watercolor paintings that depict in vivid detail the slow decay of a body, usually female, from the first moment of death to the final stage of bare bones. This Japanese art developed in the 8th century and was popular until the 19th century during the Edo period, and appeared in various formats, including scrolls and printed books. According to Jacob Moss, senior lecturer at the National Association of Decorative and Fine Arts Society that specializes in East Asian visual art, Kuzosu was inspired by Buddhist beliefs that urged followers to meditate on the temporary nature of life and the physical world by focusing on the decomposition of the body after death. The first mention of the stages of decomposition can be found in China, with texts such as the Discourse of Great Wisdom, created in 405 AD, which identified the 9 stages of corporeal decay in the same sequence that was later used in Japanese Kuzosu art. The 9 stages of decomposition are as follows: 1, distension; 2, rupture; 3, exudation of blood; 4, putrefaction; 5, discoloration and desiccation; 6, consumption by animals and birds; 7, dismemberment; 8, bones; and 9, parched to dust. Yuko Kaseki chose to inspire her Buto choreography and base her choreography 9 steps to dust on this ancient art. According to Thomas Clements, a postdoctoral researcher in paleobiology, the first stage shows the subject as she relaxes, fan in hand, dressed in her finest colorful gown. By the second image, she has died and lies naked. The next panel shows the corpse discoloring and bloating, which leads to the body beginning to rupture, lesions forming on the skin. In the 5th picture, the carcass begins to leak blood. Following this comes putrefaction, where large lesions open up, showing the internal organs. Insect larvae begin invading the corpse. In the 7th picture, the carcass has become heavily discolored, has started to being scavenged by animals and birds. All that there is left after that are the bones, which in the final scene become disarticulated until they turn to dust. Such a visceral subject is a core tenet of Buto performance. Acknowledging death and our own ephemeral nature are vital steps for achieving enlightenment. Kaseki's performance, inspired by this ancient art in which she portrays and embodies human decomposition and decay, is very common in Buto performances all over the world. It challenges audiences and viewers to diverge from anthropocentric attitudes toward mortality and instead practice equanimity towards death and the decomposing body. Influential Buto teacher Kazuo Ono would frequently urge the students in his workshops to, quote, "Don't turn away from the messiness of life and death," unquote. His statement urges artists to not shy away from decay, for it can connect us to other living beings and to a broader sense of life and time on Earth. Performance studies scholar Diana Taylor reminds us that many indigenous cosmologies and indigenous cultures throughout the Americas teach that our time on Earth is multi-layered and coexists alongside other times, the times of the gods, the natural elements, the earth, the ancestors. In contrast to Euro-Western anthropocentrism, indigenous cultures and non-Western cultures have long inculcated a relationship to mortality grounded in relational subjectivity, communion with past and future generations, and oneness with the earth and with the land. Buto's embrace and incorporation of decomposition and decay also reminds us that all living beings on our planet, from mountains, rivers, rocks, and trees, to mammals, birds, fish, as well as humans, are ephemeral, vulnerable, tender beings emerging in this present moment. They, like us, have also embarked on a long journey of corporeal transformation that seems to start before death and continues long after death. In the words of Buto artist Ushio Amagatsu, The individual is an existence that has a beginning and an end. Although the individual itself is discontinuous, outside your body there is an earthly continuity that flows like a river. It is discontinuity enveloped in continuity, and we have both elements within us. And in my final time, I'd just like to quickly state that another way that Butoh merges the monstrous and the ecology is through the use of imagery. Imagery is very important in Butoh choreographies. Dancers use imagery such as melting ice caps, tree limbs decaying, and volcanic eruptions to help them create and guide their dance movements, often accompanied with nature-themed surrealist poetry. Here's an example of a choreography in Butoh. A person is buried in a dark cave. Their body decays limb by limb like a rotting corpse on the forest floor. She, he, they become an insect. The internal organs are parched and dry. The insect is dancing on a thin sheet of paper. The insect tries to hold falling particles from its own body and dances, making rustling noises like the crackling of dry leaves. The insect becomes a person who is wandering around, so fragile they could crumble at the slightest touch. Come to stillness and finish. So this is a very common approach, and that was a choreography from the founder himself, Hijikata. As seen in this choreographic score, Butoh concentrates on bodily metamorphosis via ecological imagery, inviting the dancer to mutate their body like the changing shapes and textures of the earth. Performers Eiko and Koma, who studied with the founders, remark that these practices are constructed around images drawn from nature precisely because nature has its own sense of time and a grotesqueness that in our eyes can be beautiful. In addition, the nature imagery used in Butoh choreographies powerfully evokes non-human temporalities and the many temporalities of the earth, like animal bodies decomposing on the forest floor, tree limbs decaying over long periods of time, and the formation of sedentary rock in caves, gesturing towards geologic time, volcanic time, arboreal time, fungal, mycelial time. In conclusion, in this paper, I have attempted to highlight the important role that both monstrosity and ecology play in Butoh performance, and how grotesque, monstrous themes like the horror of decay, rotting bodies, death, and decomposition are often posited in Butoh as ecological themes. I've attempted to highlight some aspects of Butoh's choreographic practices that make it well-equipped to address monstrous ecologies. I want to underscore that there are many other important aspects of Butoh being practiced by artists worldwide, from deterritorialization and the Japanese aesthetic practice of ma to choreographies of falling and rolling on the ground and the dirt that enact what André Lepecki calls a politics of the ground. These practices act as an ecological praxis and present Butoh as a way to deepen our connection to nature, to the earth, and to monstrous ecologies. My greatest hope is that listeners and fellow scholars will see this as a heartfelt invitation to contribute to the growing discourse on the monstrosity and ecology of Butoh, and how the monstrous ecologies in Butoh performance compel audiences to reimagine our relationships with nature, offering transformative ways to experience space and time with the wider web of life on Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you for the invitation. Our next presenter will be Travis Torres Thompson of the University of New Mexico. He'll be presenting Developing an American Spectre, Spirit Photography from Mumler to Curtis. Travis Torres Thompson is a graduate student in Chicano and Chicano Studies at the University of New Mexico, focusing his research on community archives, comic studies, and nuclear culture. He's also the Native American Collections Fellow at the Center for Southwest Research, where he assists with various archival projects and generating new culturally appropriate models of managing archival content. He is currently working on writing and illustrating a horror comic about the nuclear industrial complex in New Mexico. Travis.
Good afternoon. You'll see this, based on my biography, this is kind of a departure from that type of work, but this was a topic I got interested in while working in the archives, looking at a lot of older photography, and then coming across this other happening of spirit photography that was really popular at the turn of the century in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So I'm going to begin with a short story. This is from the personal experiences of William H. Mumler in spirit photography, written by himself in 1875. This was a collection of his experiences with the people that would come into his studio. Okay. Miss J.H. Conant, medium for the Banner of Light. There's probably not a spiritualist in the world who is not familiar with the remarkable mediumship of this lady. She has for years devoted 3 days a week exclusively for the benefit of those spirits, of whatever nation or condition, who wish to return and send messages of love to those who yet remain in the Earth's sphere. Having made the preliminary manipulations of coating a plate, I placed Miss Conant in the usual position facing nearly front. I was about removing the cloth to expose the plate when suddenly she started, and turning partially to the right, held out her hand. I asked her if she saw a spirit. She replied yes. I told her to remain perfectly quiet and then removed the cloth, exposing the plate the usual time. On developing the negative, there appeared the form of a young girl, bearing the features of a white person but dressed in Indian costume, with feathers on her head, large rings in her ears, while encircling her neck was a chain, to which was attached a charm of crescent shape, which was shown to Miss Conant by Vashti, the spirit girl, a few evenings previous to her sitting for the picture. Vashti first controlled Miss Conant in 1870, as the latter was slowly recovering from a severe illness. The circumstances attending Vashti's birth were as follows. A white woman from Illinois, crossing the plains with an emigrant party, was taken prisoner and fell by lot to the share of Big Buffalo of the Piegan tribe as his wife. The Indian wife of the chief failed to relish her new domestic partner and used every means to exhibit her hatred. In time, she gave birth to a child which, in direct obedience to the law of prenatal influence, by reason of its mother's continued thought of her pale-faced rival during the gestative period, resembled a white child in a strongly marked degree. The mother detested it in consequence for the moment of its birth, called it Vashti, the captive, in derision of the prisoner woman, and endeavored to kill it on several occasions, but was prevented by the white woman, who took pity on the oppressed little one. Vashti, then about 7 years of age, was together with her father, Big Buffalo, slain at the massacre of the Piegans on the Yellowstone River by the troops of General Sheridan in December 1869. In the book From Indian Ghosts and American Subjects, Renee Berglund argues that the root of American identity is a necessary Native American specter that haunts it. This dependence on the haunting other confirms for an American nationalist identity, the perceived triumph of European colonialism. Berglund cites the presence of Native ghosts in the texts of American letters and literature, which write Native Americans as the disappeared or conquered race whose presence on the land has become not actual but spectral. Extending this idea to the medium of photography, we can analyze how photography of Native American peoples and lands have maintained this concept of ghosting, projecting Native people into the American imagination only existing in a certain period of history. The photographic medium has itself been associated with ghost and spectrality since early after its invention. With this presentation, I attempt to show how this connection is exhibited both visually in spirit photography, first captured by William H. Mumler in the fall of 1862 in his Boston studio, and conceptually in the sense that while photographs have been considered to present accurate depictions of reality, are better understood to be inherently entangled with the Western beliefs and practices from which the technology emerged. Through this second concept, we can see how photographic capturing of Native people in the American West is symbolic of the colonizers' view of what was lost in their history of conquest. I first consider the language of ghostliness and spectrality, as Berglund reveals the link between hauntings and manifestations of European American traumas of the past being relocated to the imagination. I present the re-externalizing of those hauntings in the essentialized photography of Native Americans exemplified by the works of photographers like Edward S. Curtis. It's important to understand how photography has been entangled with the supernatural, having a long history of spiritualism and the paranormal, implying that it is not from a purely scientific perspective that photography was invoked into the production of myths surrounding Native Americans in the American West. From Mumler's own account of the spirit of the Piegan girl, Vashti visiting Miss Conant and recounting a white captivity narrative, to ethnographic photography, so-called documenting of Native peoples, which has also been a dominant element in the staging of American mythology. In the Spectralities reader, the numerous contributing authors identify the ways that ghosts and hauntings evolved from disembodied spectral beings to influential conceptual metaphors permeating global culture. They trace the development of the ghost's figurative potential, following how conceptually it has come to rely less on a conviction that ghosts exist and more so become a theoretical device of something haunting like a ghost, demanding its acknowledgement. This employment of spectrality is further discussed by Berglund, who situates it in the context of the spectral native, which haunts the European American imagination. For Berglund, spectrality becomes a link between United States nationalism and the literary device of ghostly natives to confirm the conquest of America. Berglund argues that Native American ghosts, quote, function both as representations of national guilt, and, quote, signaling the unsuccessful repression of the monstrous history of conquest and attempts to remove Native Americans, and as triumphant agents of Americanization, providing a sense that the colonial project has been accomplished, because ghosts are understood as that which is gone. Berglund explains how for the hegemonic powers, collective ghosts came to describe those whose existence challenged structures of political and economic power. Haunting shifted from the physical world and into the mind. Ghosts were relocated into the imagination, where they would not merely appear to denounce the guilty, but also occupied the mind as manifestations of guilt and projections of the haunted self. America's inability to exercise the specter of colonization is this: to affirm a legitimate nationhood on American land is to deny colonialism, but the existence of actual and spectral Native Americans persistently affirms the colonial reality. This resulting American identity is an example of what Berglund described as fictive ethnicity. The story shared by Mumler regarding Miss Conant's visitor, Vashti, demonstrates an aspect of the substitution of European ancestral ghosts for Native American ones. In Conant's story, Vashti is Piegan, also known as Blackfoot, from Montana, and visited Conant after her death during the Piegan Massacre of 1869. While most specters that appeared in spirit photography at the time had a familial function as departed relatives, Vashti, though appearing white, is confirming Conant's successful appropriation of the American spirit. Vashti's story, which starts with the white captivity narrative, signals to an American becoming, as her parents are both Piegan, but she is born white due to the prenatal influence, in quotes. Vashti is not mixed European and Piegan, but is instead Piegan who becomes white, mirroring both the other American project of assimilation and the sentiment that whiteness, here a prerequisite of Americanness, was an evolutionary inevitability justifying Euro-American expansion. The photography, which already had an aura of paranormal, of native peoples and landscape in the late 1800s and early mid-1900s, similarly established a character of the native ghost. During the rise of spiritualism in the late 1800s, which saw much popularity after the American Civil War, Spiritualists who believed that spirits communicated with man sought to prove the existence of the afterlife and the immortality of the soul, looking to both old and new technologies to achieve this. Despite this sense of enchantment that some held with photography, it has as much been a common misconception that a fundamental characteristic of photography is its ability to record the visible world with truth and accuracy. It is now understood that photography is both artistic expression and relied upon to inform us about the world. But the truth of a photo is first assigned by the photographer, whose frame represents a certain judgment, and then again by the viewer, who reads and assigns their own meaning. In this way, photos are both taken and viewed through a lens. The photograph, according to James Farris, quote, illustrates myth or reveals myth, not history. This is especially visible when we analyze how it was used to document non-Western cultures. James Farris writes an extensive analysis of Western representational conventions of Navajo in photographs, describing the dominant narrative about Native Americans that was established by Western photographers. Additionally, the idea of privilege of sight is fundamental to the origins of photography. This concept of freedom to extend our vision everywhere is a feature of expansion and power, not a biological or universally accruing human right that is shared by many indigenous knowledge systems. And to address a common anecdote, while there may have been some peoples who believed the photograph would steal away your soul, it is better understood that it does not steal it into the picture, but traps it into the mind of the viewer. The photo does not tell the story or give any context alone. The photo does not tell the story or give any context. Alone, it can limit our understanding and prevent that which is pictured from changing. After the Civil War, at the same time that Mumler was capturing Vashti and other spirits in his portrait photography, photographers on government-sponsored exhibitions began to create a visual record of the West, believing that Native Americans were soon going to disappear. Images by photographers like Edward S. Curtis became emblematic of a disappearing people whose struggle against Western expansion and assimilation was not depicted, but instead was portrayed in limited ways that rendered them frozen in a certain point in time in the American imagination, and visually reduced to Western tropes. For instance, these are two photos taken from this is the same photo taken from Curtis of a Piegan lodge. In the image on the left, you can see down by the gentleman to his right, there's a clock. And then the image that was actually published in the volume was dodged or burned out of the photo to present a certain story. While Curtis was not the first to introduce stereotypes of Native Americans in the West, he frequently tended towards them. It is not that Curtis and other frontier photographers only took pictures of a perceived timeless Native American reality, but those were the images that already had taken form in the American imagination, so those were what saw circulation. In this way, photography of Native Americans has contributed to the enchanted character often associated with the Southwest. By casting Native people as America's ghosts, the West was set as the place where one could glimpse the haunted history of Euro-American settler colonialism firsthand. According to Lyman, the myths captured through the lens and projected into the American imagination have, quote, been an integral part of the development of American culture. By choosing to specialize in rather mythical imagery of the Indian, Curtis presented an allegory which appealed strongly to a sense of Americanness, end quote. Photography assisted in spectralizing Native Americans by only depicting them as exemplars of traditions the West had accepted for them. Even though the photographic subjects have changed and Native peoples have survived attempted erasure in many ways, what the frontier spirit photographers revealed about the attitudes and beliefs in an American haunted by colonialism has continued to haunt places like the Southwest that have been defined by this selective past. Let's see, I'll go back real quick. So on the left is another example of a image that was put into circulation much more than the one on the right, which clearly there's a different story being told, or just another aspect of the story that isn't as commonly told. They're both now in the same collection. So work that kind of revisits the archive does function to get a more full story. Let's see. For the sake of time, I'll skip some of this, but this again, this is one of Curtis's translators, A.B. Upshaw, who was Crow. The one on the left was used in The Vanishing Race, which was his photographic volumes. And the one on the right, again, is in the archive, so it does demonstrate that he had created close relationships, and it wasn't maybe... I don't want to speak on his intentions, but he did have close relationships with people, but the ones that were put into the volumes and had circulation were more like the image on the left. We'll also skip this. But briefly, though, if you haven't read Shutter and other books by Ramona Emerson, do check them out. They're very well worth it. They have to do kind of with overlap of seeing ghosts and photography, and the idea of photography as evidence or not as evidence. So this all leads me to my current thesis, that photography is in essence a ghost generator, introducing in a way that no other medium had what is called the death effect of photography, dead for having been frozen, muted, seen, or reduced to a moment. It is not a naive response to say that photography can steal a soul, but instead is an insight into the way that photography has often been used as a visual reduction of the other. Additionally, frontier photography of the southwestern landscape does just as much work to set a stage characterized by emptiness, with sweeping vistas and ancient sites only inhabited by native ghosts. This genre of photography, while imparting much of the beauty of the land, does not show, say, the radioactive ghosts of nuclear testing and devastation of extractive industries, both results of ad campaigns with Curtis's photography that have encouraged settlement and tourism in the Southwest for the past century. I'll also skip the Mumler case. There's a really good book, The Strange Case of William Mumler, that goes into his whole trial. He was put on trial for faking photography, is what they were claiming that he was doing, or faking the spirit photography, and he was got off and under the argument that he didn't realize what was happening until it happened. So basically, he got off because they said we couldn't confirm or deny whether it was actually spirits that were showing up. And I'll finish with this photo taken by Mumler sometime between 1870 and 1872, depicting what he refers to in its title as The Spirits of America, Africa, and Europe. Here, the seated subject is visited by three of the spectral avatars of American history, and whether intentional or not, he depicts a part of the haunted history of American identity. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Travis. Our final presenter is Ariane Farris, University of California, Santa Cruz, presenting False Faces, Masks, and the Performance of Identity and Morality in the Dark Night, 2008. Ariane Farris is a PhD student in the Literature Department at University of California, Santa Cruz. Her current research examines fictional representations of facial difference through the lenses of disability studies, gender studies, and monster studies, focusing on the symbolic and ideological meanings encoded into these representations. Thank you, Ariane.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. A brief note before I begin. I will be using the terms disfigurement and difference interchangeably to describe facial difference. I recognize the derogatory connotations of the term disfigurement, but I choose to use it here because at times it best captures the intended representation in the film. So I'm talking about false faces, masks, and the performance of identity in The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight, the second film in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, has a truly remarkable number of characters with facial differences. While many books or films have one significant character with a facial scar, The Dark Knight has three, and through these facial differences allegorizes the conflicts at the heart of the film. Heath Ledger's Joker has scars that extend from the sides of his mouth, mimicking a Glasgow smile. He accentuates these with a red lipstick across his mouth and along the scars. Partway through the film, Harvey Dent, the hotshot DA and handsome new boyfriend of Batman's love interest, Rachel Dawes, has half his face burned off. And finally, in the climax, an unnamed man, played by Tom Lister, with strabismus, more colloquially known as lazy eye, and scarring on the right side of his face, is the first person to refuse to play the Joker's violent game. The scarred faces of Harvey Dent and the Joker produce a narrative of facial difference, in which the disfigured face of the individual men becomes signifiers of corruption and are contrasted with Batman's whole face, which remains unmarked. However, I will argue that Lister's character challenges that narrative and offers the possibility to re-signify facial difference as something more than a sign of evil. First, some background. Facial difference, like other forms of deviance, is frequently imbued with symbolic meaning in literature and film. As Rosemary Garland Thompson, who I'm sure many of you are aware of, tells us, Western tradition posits the visible world as an index of a coherent and just invisible world, encouraging us to read the material body as a sign invested with transcendent meaning. Thus, disabilities and disfigurements are rendered into visible signifiers that convey specific meanings to the audience. They offer reassurance to the spectator by inscribing a truth of a character into the material body. David T. Mitchell and Sharon L. Snyder argue that disabilities in fictional representations appear as either a stock feature of characterization or an opportunistic metaphorical device, and that as an opportunistic metaphorical device, physical and cognitive anomalies promise to lend a tangible body to textual abstractions. At times, facial difference has been one of the bodily signs specifically linked to criminality. In the late 19th century, Cesare Lombroso, considered the father of criminal anthropology, suggested that, while offenders may not look fierce, there is nearly always something that distinguishes their appearance. For example, compared with the insane, criminals have more traumatic lesions of the head and oblique eyes. And we can imagine both are compared with the normal person. As a site of expression, the face mediates the relationship between people and the recognition of another's individual identity. Vanita Seth explains that. Nope, that was too many. For individuality to find its expressive anchor in the face itself must be produced as singular, as intimately tied to the individuated self. The construction of disfigurement as deviance and the easy associations between the violence that caused the disfigurement and the character on whose face it appears produces a visual lexicon in which facial difference can be read as symbolic of a character's moral corruption. So I begin with Batman, however, although Bruce Wayne does not have a facial difference, his obsession with concealing his own identity, while conversely glorifying the unmasked face as a symbol of hope and justice, provides a foundation for the representation of facial difference as a visual metaphor in this film. The unmasked face, which Batman glorifies, is of course the normate face. In the first film, Batman Begins, Bruce chooses to create Batman because people need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy. I can't do that as Bruce Wayne. As a man, I'm flesh and blood. I can be ignored, destroyed. But as a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting. In order to achieve his goal of making Gotham's streets safe, Batman needs to create a persona that is both more and less than human. In donning the mask of Batman, he becomes a symbol meant to inspire bravery, as much as to strike fear into the hearts of those who break the law. Despite his violent vigilante behavior and the widespread corruption of the Gotham police, Batman is inextricably tied to the police. He always operates with the implied approval of Jim Gordon, the Gotham's one good police officer in the films. Before his descent into villainy, Harvey Dent likewise praises Batman, acting as his staunchest supporter despite his role as the city's district attorney. Their approval of Batman's extra-legal activities grants a kind of legitimacy to the vigilante. And although Bruce's cowl hides his identity, Bruce Wayne's normative, even idealized features provide a reassuring contrast to the scarred visage of the Joker. As the titular hero, his handsome, unscarred face suggests that Bruce Wayne shares the incorruptibility he desires in his alter ego. And as I wanted to point out, it's very odd that our heroes, despite engaging in constant violence, never get facial scars. Conversely, the persona that Heath Ledger's Joker creates seems to be solely comprised of violence and corruption. Like Batman, the Joker creates a persona that is beyond the limitations of the mere human, more idea than man. Unlike Batman, the Joker's face paint seems to be more than merely a mask. His performance is his identity. Both the police and Batman fail to identify the man behind the persona of the Joker, unable to link his fingerprints, his DNA, or even his clothes to any real person. Not even the brutal scars slashed across his face provide any clue as to his identity. Though he seems to delight in telling his would-be victims stories about how he got his scars, each story says more about how the Joker sees the person than him. The story he tells the black mob boss Gamble features senseless acts of violence by an abusive father, while the story he tells Rachel Dawes centers on the betrayal of a wife who couldn't stand the sight of the sacrifice her husband made for her. At the end of Batman Begins, Rachel, now aware of Bruce's dual identity as Batman, tells him that although she understands why he has created this vigilante persona, she cannot be with him until he can set it aside. While Gamble's backstory is unknown, the alcoholic, violent father in the story the Joker tells aligns with certain racist stereotypes about black men. In each case, the Joker's stories reveal nothing about him, but instead reflect some twisted, funhouse mirror version of the stories of the person in front of him, or at least the stereotypes about them. Mysterious and apparently unmotivated by money, power, or any certain tragic backstory, the Joker personifies a force of chaos. As Alfred says to Bruce, some men just want to watch the world burn. While they fail to identify his Joker, his scars do provide information about him in a different way, by materially embodying the one constant of his character, the one thing that supersedes his various performances, his love of violence. During their final confrontation in the film, Batman asks the Joker, "What were you trying to prove? That deep down everyone's as ugly as you?" By drawing an explicit connection between the Joker's ugly face and the Joker's gleeful violence, by drawing an explicit connection between the Joker's gleeful violence and his non-normative face, Batman renders the Joker's ugly face into a reflection of his ugly desires. This phrasing also reminds the viewer of the burned face of Harvey Dent, who the Joker successfully manages to physically and morally disfigure, and who I will be discussing next. And I forgot the quote, apologies for that. In their attempts to personify the forces of order and justice, and violence and chaos respectively, Batman and the Joker create a narrative in which their conflict is about more than just a vigilante fighting a criminal. At stake is the soul of Gotham City. As the face of Gotham, Harvey comes to embody its soul. At a fundraiser Bruce throws for Harvey, he praises the work that he has done to dismantle the criminal gangs in Gotham. He tells the gathered people, "Look at this face. This is the face of Gotham's bright future." Bruce builds Harvey into a symbol of hope for Gotham, a hope for a future that doesn't require masked vigilantes fighting shadowy villains. His words position Harvey as a different kind of savior to Batman, one whose very knowability, represented by his unmasked face, establishes his trustworthiness. For Bruce, Harvey represents true legal justice, perhaps even the possibility of the end of a need for Batman. As he says to Rachel, Harvey is that hero. He locked up half the city's criminals, and he did it without wearing a mask. Gotham needs a hero with a face. Against the faceless characters of the Batman and the Joker, Harvey's handsome, unmarred, bare face is rendered into an emblem of hope and safety. As such a symbolic representation, though, the idea of Harvey's incorruptibility becomes crucial. Batman stops Harvey when he kidnaps one of the Joker's followers and attempts to extract information from him by threat and intimidation. He reprimands Harvey, saying, "You're the symbol of hope that I could never be. Your stand against organized crime is the first legitimate ray of light in Gotham in decades. If anyone saw this, everything would be undone." The future that Batman is striving for, a future in which Batman is no longer necessary, becomes dependent on Harvey's successful performance of the perfect, incorruptible representative of justice. However, the Joker responds to Batman's attempt to turn Harvey into a hero of Gotham by trying to destroy Harvey. He has Harvey and Rachel kidnapped and engineers the situation so that Batman can only rescue Harvey, and who is forced to listen to Rachel's death. Though Batman saves his life, Harvey's face, the so-called face of Gotham, is left badly burned on one side. Distraught and furious, obsessed with getting revenge on those he blames for Rachel's death, Harvey embarks on a killing spree. Within Batman and the Joker's narrative of heroes and villains, Harvey's defacement remakes the bright face of Gotham's future into its greatest vulnerability. Harvey's potential threat is so great that even after Batman defeats the Joker laughs in Batman's face, telling him that none of it matters because, as he says, the people will lose hope. The people's hope will break when they get a good look at the real Harvey Dent. This is a narrative that Jim Gordon and Batman both apparently endorse. In the final scene of the film, as Gordon stands over Harvey's dead body, he says to Batman, "Whatever chance you gave us at fixing our city dies with Harvey's reputation. We bet it all on him. The Joker took the best of us and tore him down. People will lose hope." In order to protect the people of Gotham, they resolve, therefore, to erase the stain of Harvey's fall by masking the truth. Their decision is symbolically represented by Batman literally turning Harvey's head so that the unburnt side faces the viewer, obscuring the damaged side of Harvey's face, as he tells Gordon, "Gotham needs its true hero." Batman claims Harvey's murders as his own, and the faceless symbol of the Batman, originally intended to be incorruptible, replaces Harvey as the villain to preserve the illusion of the perfect, righteous hero. But this is where the film confounds me, because it ignores the climactic moment when the people of Gotham get a chance to make the choice for themselves, and they choose good. The Joker sets up this deadly prisoner's dilemma where the two fairies who are transporting people off the island in an attempt to get them away from the Joker, which doesn't work. One boat is transporting innocent civilians, and the other carries prisoners from Harvey's successful raid of the mobs. Always at least 2 steps ahead, the Joker has rigged the ferries with bombs. He gives each ship the detonator for the other ferry, and tells them that if they blow it up before midnight, he'll spare their boat. As midnight creeps closer, people on each boat grow steadily more desperate, arguing that they should save themselves even if it requires sacrificing the other boat. Until one of the criminals, an unnamed man, played by Tom Lister, stands up and demands the detonator. Leveraging the stereotypical associations with his gender, race, physical size, and facial differences, he enacts his own performance when he tells the captain that, as someone who has killed before, he is better able to do it again. However, the moment the captain hands him the detonator with a shamefaced relief, Lister's character throws it out the window. He makes the moral choice, with no guarantee that the people on the other boat will do the same, or that the Joker will not fulfill his threat to blow up both ferries. His utilization of his scarred visage points to what Seth calls the promiscuity of the face. As she says, if we can read the face like a book, it also has the capacity to deceive, to dissimulate, to feign sincerity, to mask and shield from view the real, authentic self. As a criminal whose single significant act in the film is to stand up to the Joker, Lister's character's facial scars challenge the associations thus far built by the Joker and Harvey's representations of facial difference. His actions mock the significance assigned to the fall of Harvey Dent. Even Gordon's fear that the reveal of Harvey's criminal actions will result in the release of all the mob prisoners he prosecuted is undercut by Lister's character's status as one of those prisoners. Furthermore, although many of the people on the boats call for the destruction of the other in order to save themselves, not a single person on either boat protests when Lister's character, and later when another unnamed man on the ferry full of innocent civilians, choose not to use the detonators. I focus on Lister's character here because he makes the choice much more decisively, and of course because he has facial scars. The civilians, both criminal and innocent, choose hope. They choose to risk their own lives rather than surrender to the Joker's fear and violence. The scars on Lister's character's face undercut the symbolism ascribed to facial differences, and in doing so, they challenge established binaries of good and evil, criminal and innocent, of hero and villain. Lister's character destabilizes the representation of facial difference, revealing it for the false face it always was. Thank you.
questions and answers. Michael, will you be running the mic? Great.
Got it. I got it. Drew.
I have a question for Yvonne. That was a wonderful talk and wonderfully presented. You, forgive me for asking this, but as a historian, I'm just interested in sort of the context of Buto's emergence. And you had said that it came out in the counterculture. So I'm thinking of like the AMPO protests and things that are going on at that moment. Were there a lot of students involved, like student performers? Were they performing Buto? And I'm also wondering, you showed us the images of decay that the performers sort of embody. Is there an element of sort of an embrace of self-destruction at all? I'm thinking of the sort of indulgent culture at the time. So like at the end of the war, there's things like what's called a kasutori culture, the drinking of alcohol from discarded jet fuels, which are making use of the remnants of the war, but also destroy the body. There's a kind of acceptance of self-destruction and indulgence. Is that a part of Buto as well? Or is it more of a sort of coming to terms with the natural decay of the human body?
Thank you for your questions. Is this working? Yeah? Okay, thanks.
Loud and clear.
Oh. Well, the answer to the first question is the first generation of Buto artists that were practicing and performing in the 1960s, some of them were students, yes, and those students were involved in the protests, but not all of them. Buto is very heterogeneous. It's very diverse. And so people come from different backgrounds. So some of them were students and some of them were not. But as you point out, that was a time, a very dynamic, tumultuous, precarious time. There were a lot of protests. There were also happenings on the street in the style of Alan Capro and John Cage. There were these street performances and parades, and it was a time of bold, audacious, wild experimentation. And yeah, some of them were students, but not all of them. Some of them were apolitical. There are a lot of apolitical Buto artists back then and today. But it's a very heterogeneous mix. And in regards to the second question, indulgence. Well, that's I'm going to have to think more about that. In my experience, I've taken workshops with over 30 different Buto teachers, Japanese and also Latin American, European, USA, from all over the world. And I don't recall an indulgent, self-indulgent relationality with death being very prevalent in a lot of the choreographies or in a lot of the trainings. I can't really recall that. I think if it does exist, it's rare. It's not very dominant. I think that the relationality that's explored and performed is more of, I argue, very ecological. It's death as a part of earthly cycles. It's decomposition as something that all beings on Earth experience. And sometimes it also involves actually fear. It's not something that is turned away. So it's fear and acceptance and equanimity. It's terror, it's horror, and also a kind of equanimity. But self-indulgence, I don't think I recall that very much.
Thanks. Anybody else? Or Mike, do you have something to say? Oh, great. Samantha.
Ariane, thank you for the amazing paper. We really enjoyed that. I wonder if you want to say a little bit more about feeling confounded and about Lister's character. I hate to jump to the sort of boring, obvious conclusion, but I mean, is this one way of reinforcing the Joker is right, that like you can't predict anything, everything's chaos, Batman's full of shit because he's so one-dimensional? I kind of hope that there's more to it than that, but I wonder what you actually think beyond, yeah, it messes up the rest of the formula, and I wonder if you have thoughts on why.
I actually see the sort of what Lister's character is doing as something positive, because so much of the other representation is so negative. It's, Harvey's getting his face scarred directly coincides with his turn from being the symbol of hope to being this evil villain just out to get revenge. And so by destabling that representation, it's offering the possibility that this isn't the only way of reading facial scars, or even that all these ideas that we're putting onto facial scars as legible signs of something bad, especially on the face, that is a created meaning, and that doesn't necessarily actually reflect reality. As to the Joker, I don't quite think that that's the kind of chaos the Joker is talking about. Like, in some ways, the Joker isn't even a true embodiment of chaos. Like, I call him that but it's so specifically violent chaos. True chaos would also encompass what Lister's character does, and the Joker is like, darn it, when that happens, guess I have to do everything myself. So I don't think Lister's character is proving the Joker right. I think he's challenging the Joker's ideas, because I do think the Joker is one of the people participating in it. He's emphasizing his own facial difference, and he engineers sort of Harvey's downfall, both the physical representation of it and the moral killing spree stuff. So yeah, I'm still kind of confounded, because it does break it in interesting ways, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how, but I don't think that it's proving the Joker right. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Okay, John.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to follow up just to get some further thoughts, because in addition to the scarring and the disfigurement, there's also a lot of masking going on in this film. I mean, Batman is masked. Joker first appears masked, right, with the clown makeup, with the clown mask. And then he disguises himself several times as a nurse, as other things. And I'm just wondering what you feel the relationship is between the masking and the scarring or the disfigurement. Are they doing similar things, different things? And how is Batman implicated in that? Because, even though you point out as Bruce Wayne, he kind of has this perfect, unusually perfect face. He also has this other side of him, like Harvey Dent does, right? So is his masking doing the same thing that Harvey Dent's scarring is doing, or are they doing different things in your mind?
I'm still trying to figure some of that out, but I don't think they're doing quite the same thing, because the masks, they're all kind of multivalent. The masks are being used for, Batman's using it to hide his identity, to be this symbol, but also to, as Alfred says, I hope you're doing it to protect me too. And the Joker, all of his performances, to finish with Batman's choices to mask are very specific. And while they're hiding his identity, they're limited in sort of their scope, in that they're very focused on this sort of persona Batman and what that means. Whereas the Joker, his performances are kind of all over the place. They're, rather than creating a new identity, they're kind of confounding the identity. As to the relationships with scars are also, as we've seen, a bit multivalent too. And the difference with the masks and the scars, I think, is that masks are deliberately trying to hide a truth, while the scars are supposed to show the truth. But as we see, both of them are kind of not quite always doing what they're supposed to. Sorry, I hope that answers your question. I'm still figuring a lot of that out.
Mike.
I have a question for Travis. So you left a couple of roads kind of blocked for us, and I was hoping you could return to one of those. It was Mumler who was put on trial. Do I recall that correctly?
Yeah.
And while you explained to us or described to us how he got off, what were you going to do with that example in terms of how it was going to serve your thesis?
To preface, the way when I'm thinking about these things is very much like yarn board theory stuff, where I'm shooting all these threads in different places. So maybe why that one was cut out could have been it hadn't been fully fleshed out as well. But I think with that is, I guess the thought was that rather than it being, I guess, confirming the proof of the spirits, he was relying on the idea that it was still a mystery. So it wasn't him arguing that no, these are real. It was more that the camera is a mystery. And so relating that, I guess, to the idea that I touched on being kind of thrown around, that a camera reveals truth or reveals facts or evidence. And then in his trial, he's talking about kind of the mystery of the camera. And that, so there's this technology that is created or in each generation, or we always have new technologies coming that are created, but then somehow this creation that we make, there's a mystery to it that we don't know what it does, which in some sense I think we don't understand, like a social impact or a cultural impact that it will have, but we should understand like the technical impact of it, and that's sort of where I was going with it, I guess, is
My question's for Travis as well. That last image that you showed had the three spectral images of the European, African, and American spirits. I know spectral photography was popular in Victorian England as well. And do you know if there are other examples of colonized people in this kind of spectral imagery? Does like in British spectral photography, do we see Indian or African or South Asian people in those photographs?
I think I would have to do a much deeper dive to look into that. I know that spectral photography did, there were centers where like it did have a lot of popularity. Why I chose that last one in particular is that in the earlier one, it's still an individual, like it's still a person with a story, and then in this one, they were not individuals or specific people, but they were like ideas of a people, and so just this concept where even the ghosts that he was taking pictures of, which was kind of this claim to have a emotional or like personal attachment to the people that would sit down, he even had in a very meta way, like would put a photo on a table and take a picture of the photo, and he claimed that ghosts would appear that were related to the photo. But that one I think was interesting to me because it had they had already at that point moved beyond this idea of individual ghosts haunting, and it was just this concept of the collective ghost of an event, of something haunting. So,
Yeah, they seem to act kind of like the avatars of the continents that you see in like 15th century frontispieces and things like that, where the feminized avatar of America or of Africa. Colombia was one of those feminized figures. And then there's the handsome white boy looking off into the future in the foreground. It's a really an exquisite artifact that you found, and I think it's cool the direction that you're taking the argument. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Okay.
Hi. All three of those papers were really amazing. I really enjoyed listening to those. This question is also for Travis. I think this is maybe the first time in seeing that picture of sort of Navajo woman in like a serious pose juxtaposed with her smiling that was not circulated. I hate to bring this word into the conversation, but I have to. And thinking about the role of AI and how there's this idea that like we all have archives, the role of the archive. We all have these photo collections which have been supercharged with our ability to constantly take pictures of ourselves and selfies. And we can discard the ones we like, and we can put up the ones that we don't like, and we can put up the ones that we do like. And AI is now conditioned to kind of recreate stereotypes right now. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the archive's role kind of in this future post-apocalyptic potential AI hellscape to kind of disrupt that or subvert that in some way, in the same way that you've done in your archival research with the spectrophotography, but also just showcasing that there's these differences in which images are put out. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess just reading that there is a major role with archivists and archives and researchers too to look for the depth of what images are there and not just reproduce or reuse the same images that have been used. As an archivist, I know that a lot of collections will only digitize a certain amount to kind of get a draw for it, so people will visit and look at the collection, the full collection. I hope that's something that's changing just for accessibility reasons, to make archives more accessible broadly. But certainly, if there's a need for just putting a few images up available online, to really consider what images those are that have a more rounded perspective, with that understanding that like to get a bigger picture you need a much wider context, and that might not even be expressed in just the photos, so like there needs to be some story kind of backing up what is the photo, or describing what is in the photo in a way that has been reviewed by not only just maybe the person who donated them, but the person who actually is, or someone who could speak better on who's represented in the photo. If that answers the question.
Thanks, Travis. We got time for one more. I see. Kathy.
This is a question for all three on the historization of what's going on for things like Butoh. All of the creators were in the 1940s affected by Hiroshima and things like that. And many people, at least in that early area of the 70s, were arguing that, yes, it was to stop the nuclear submarines and everything else like that, and to represent some of the aspects of rejection of the westernization and going into the Japanese body, the Japanese religion, all of those kinds of things. Of course, the 1990s, it's out all over the world and becomes a major representation of Japan. I wonder what the articulation of it, is right now and today. Is it something that's continuing to grow? Because, it was in the 1990s, along with piercing and everything about body disciplines and Native American, ghost dances and stabbings and all those kinds of things came in a package and were in some ways part of the Butoh moment in American youth culture. So just, where it is now. For The Dark Knight, I'm looking at the date, didn't see the movie, but I'm wondering, is it any way a response to the American situation of involvement in the Middle East and, lying about war and that starting of that whole mess that we continue to live with and are seeing happening right now? Or is this a completely apolitical movie that's just about New York City or, something endemic just to American culture? For the, the spiritualist photography, of course, it's bound with some of the cabinets of curiosity that were happening, especially in New England, as women were becoming more the mediums. It was a moment when we saw people like Helena Blavatsky and Annie Besant were also taking over. When they move into that thing, it is very often the Native American who, is sort of disappearing, not in the Southwest, but within the New England consciousness, is often one of the people who the spirit mediums who would be manifesting. And Blavatsky, in her innovation, was bringing the colonial that she was carrying from Europe. And Besant, and of course, they then become involved in going to India, starting the Indian Nationalist Party and other things like that. Besant doing the flag and doing all these kind of spirit medium things that are in some ways about imagining different futures, things like that. That's not the Southwest thing. This was pretty much confined to the New England thing. But I just wonder if you've done anything with that cabinet of curiosities trope of the Native American, which is involved with the spiritualist movement, the rise of women as the spiritualist thing in that particular period.
We got an answer for that one? We'll do a quick answer and then we got to close up shop.
I mean, I guess the really quick answer would be I don't know enough about the specifics of that movement and kind of the other extensions of it. I know a bit about Mumler, enough to just kind of see the relationship that type of photography had with the photographers that were sent out west. So I could probably think a bit more on it and have something better, but that's the quick answer.
Thank you. I appreciate your question. I also can't fully answer it, but I certainly don't think the film is apolitical, and I want to dive much more into the specific things that are being represented by the masks and by the glorification of the bare face, because I think those are tied to certain ideologies that I would like to explore more. So thank you.
In regards to Butoh, the founder, Hijikata, produced a lot of writing, and hardly any of his writing addresses the nuclear bomb. And only a little bit of the writing from the founder talks about rebelling against the West in a political context. He writes and talks more about rejecting Western aesthetics and the arrival of Western dance forms and art forms into Japan. But he also opposes old school Japanese aesthetics. He's very anti-Nove, anti-kabuki. He says those don't go far enough for me. So what he writes a lot about is death and our relationship to death. And he writes a lot about the search for a primordial body, some kind of primordial body that is very close to the mud, to the sod, to the dirt, to the earth, to the subterranean realm. So I think that kind of artistic exploration is still very relevant, perhaps now more than ever in this era of vast environmental destruction and global climate change. So as we approach the 70th anniversary of Butoh, I think it can still be a very relevant performance form for the era that is to come. And academically, it's finally starting to get some attention. 2019 was the first year that Routledge published a companion to Butoh performance. 2019, just a couple years ago. So it's very early in the stages of academia writing about and researching Butoh, and I'm excited to be a part of that.
Thanks, Ivan. Thank you so much, panel. Thank you, Mike. Wonderful.